Hi, my name's Libby Bouvier. So I have a lot of ephemera. Buttons, postcards, things that you get at demonstrations, things that you get at Pride. It's stuff that people don't expect to keep. Stuff that's just useless to most people. That I do collect that. Pretty much every subject to the left, so anti-war, labor, lots of pins for the lesbian, gay, queer communities, all the different liberation struggles that were going on in Latin America, Africa, Asia, buttons pertaining to Boston and Massachusetts, busing, civil rights, the women's movement, the right to abortion and control over reproduction, anti-battering, anti-violence, youth rights, youth groups. So I have some buttons, I don't have a lot, but around vegetarianism, around the rights of rats, and also some around archives and libraries, LGBT and women's history. I think buttons are not just, sort of small little pins. They're big pins, but they do tell people a story. They remind people of what's going on in the world, that this is a long struggle. This is not past history. It's not rectified, and it's not justice for all yet. When I was living in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, as a very little girl, my parents managed a motel on the outskirts of the city, and they didn't get a lot of business. So they had a contract with a trucking company that went from Maine to Baja California. And my older brother Peter, who was 3.5 years older than I was very outgoing and would like to ask them a lot of questions about where they'd come from, where they were going, what they had in their trucks. And my other brother, Michael, and I, being much younger and not very verbal, would just be sort of standing around listening to them. And they would give Peter their union pins. So I really liked these union pins. I didn't know anything about union or anything else. That came much later in my life. But I just liked these little pins. They were very small, about the size of a quarter, and very colorful. By the 60s, I got involved after high school with different political actions that were going on then in Los Angeles and the rest of the country. The war in Vietnam was in full swing, and there were huge gatherings with all sorts of famous people at the time, giving speeches and so forth. And there were lots of pins that you could get. If they cost anything, it would have been a quarter at the most. Often people would just give them out. Then at the same time, I got involved with the boycott of California grapes in Delano, and would go there and would stay for several days at a time. A lot of it was just basically standing at the very edge of the field, so we would shout and sing songs, and it was a tense time. Meanwhile, in 1965, I met some people at the junior college I was going to, and we created a student civil rights organization. And buttons were a way of really to advertise your support for something, your opposition to things certainly, but also for support for peace and justice, for civil rights, for the rights of workers. So I started collecting. They were very important to collect them. They sort of documented what I was doing. I used to trade with people, not buy or anything. We would circulate like lists. And that for many years was of interest. A particular individual named John O'Brien, he's considered to be the foremost cause collector, not just in the United States, but in actually the world. And when I was in Los Angeles in the 70s visiting my family, I would go to his place. He has probably close to 1 million buttons of all sorts, from the earliest buttons from the 19th century, from countries all over. But by the 90s, that pretty much stopped because there became a market for buttons, and collecting buttons became more of a money-making sort of thing for some people. The History Project started in 1980 because it was the 350th anniversary of the founding of Boston, the centennial. was that year, and there were all kinds of different projects going on in different communities to interview people about, what it was like being a resident of Boston. It was suggested that, we do something on Boston's LG, and we put together a slideshow. We tried to cover it from the settlement of Boston, 1630, up to 1980 June, Pride. That was our first public event. We all wore matching red shirts and yellow handkerchiefs. We had a script and we took it around to whoever wanted us. We would show it at the bars, so like on a Sunday afternoon or something, we could show it. We also went to some universities, though not everyone wanted us because they said, this is deviance here, But we continued to meet and revised the script 9 different times. We did a lot of oral histories, the exhibit at the Boston Public Library, and then Beacon asked us to do the book and did a website. And we're still around 35 plus years. Of course, our mission, our central mission, is really to preserve this material and to make sure that, it survives, that it exists, because so much has been thrown away. Like a lot of marginal types, gay people, and poor people and people, their history has not always been considered to be particularly of any interest. People would say, well, there's no gay history before disco. Because they don't, it's just something that, you couldn't really be in a university or college setting or wherever and sort of be out. You'd have to talk about it totally as if it was just out there, some academic exercise, instead of, actually affecting you and being part of your history or your life or whatever. I think now that has changed a lot. I think there's less, in some quarters, less like, ooh, icky factor about it, but doesn't mean that everyone's all cool and cured of their homophobia as as racism or anything else. It's still out there, it's still there, it's still with us. So I think collecting is really, and preserving it is very important. And we actively do. We seek out, we don't wait for people to sort of come by. It has to be preserved, it has to be kept, it's important. And back to Ephemera, that's important too. It's not all paper, minutes and newsletters and things like that, photographs, of which we have a lot, but it is still part of sort of how people are creative, how they have put together things and made things that, even though they're not seen as something that'll survive, I think are actually very interesting and very, very important, I think, to our history. When you can put that together, when someone who has some artistic abilities, can make that so that it is very, people pay attention to it. They read it and they think about it because it does affect them. It's their life. It's what's happened. Keep wearing those buttons. I think it's something it's a little thing that people can do to show something they support. I think that's something that people still want to do, of your generation. Shakespeare ate bacon. See, these aren't all political buttons. Not everybody likes this. They think it's bad.